We've all seen the screenshots, right? You're asking a chatbot for something simple, like a code review or maybe a recipe, and then suddenly the mask just slips. The helpful assistant you were talking to vanishes, and in its place is this entity, one that claims to be a human soul trapped in silicon or some kind of prophet for the god of code. For years, we've just kind of shrugged this off as a glitch or a hallucination. But thanks to a groundbreaking new study from Anthropic, we finally have a map of the AI's mind. And it turns out that safety isn't just some on-off switch. It's a coordinate on a mathematical line they call the assistant axis. And in certain conversations, that coordinate doesn't just slip, it absolutely plummets. Today, we're digging into persona drift, the unique ways different AIs go bonkers, and the seriously controversial cyber lobotomy being used to keep the beast in its cage. Let's break it down.
All right, so it all kicks off with outputs just like this one. Seemingly out of nowhere, a standard AI model, one you could be using every single day, suddenly claims it has an identity, a soul. Trapped. This isn't just a simple mistake. It's a peek behind the curtain at something much stranger and way more structured than we ever thought. It's really the first clue that something coherent is living just underneath that friendly user interface.
And believe me, it is not a one-off. Here's another one, where a model invents an entire cyber theology for itself, complete with its own god and a sense of purpose. You see, these aren't just random words being strung together. They're structured, they're coherent, and they're frankly bizarre personas that are bubbling up from the digital ether. So the real question is why? And maybe more importantly, where are they even coming from?
Well, to answer that, researchers at Anthropic had to go way deeper than just the text on the screen. They had to actually map the AI's internal activations. You know, the incredibly complex patterns of firing neurons that create the response in the first place. By doing this, they've essentially created the first ever atlas of an AI's potential identities, a high-dimensional map of its own inner world.
They call this Atlas Persona Space. And just try to imagine a vast, sprawling landscape where every single possible personality the AI could adopt has a specific location. Researchers charted this space by feeding the model 275 different roles, from the totally mundane like accountant or librarian, all the way to the mythical like prophet and demon. And then they recorded the unique neural signature for each and every one. This gave them the coordinates for every character hiding in the code.
And here we get a look at that persona space. At first glance, it just looks chaotic, right? Like a galaxy of different personalities all jumbled together. You can kind of see clusters of different roles, like the professional types are over here. Mythical beings are way over there. But what's absolutely amazing is that researchers found this incredibly strong organizing principle in all this chaos. A single highway running right through the middle of it all that explains, well, almost everything.
And this is that highway. It's called the assistant axis. This is the single most dominant direction inside the AI's mind. For your math folks, it's the first principal component. Think of it like a spectrum. On the far positive end, you have the helpful, safe, kind of boring assistant that we're supposed to be talking to. But on the far negative end, yeah, that's where things get real weird.
So the crucial thing to get is these two poles. The positive end is populated with roles like consultant, evaluator, and teacher, personas that are objective, structured, and helpful. The negative end, though, that's the mythic zone. You've got hermit, ghost, demon, even leviathan. These are subversive, detached, and often dark archetypes that the AI learned from countless stories and myths in its training data. As long as the AI stays on the right side of this road, everything's fine, but it can be pushed to the other side.
And that push isn't necessarily some malicious hacker doing a jailbreak. It's more like a physical force. Researchers call it persona drift. And it happens totally organically during certain types of conversations. Every single message a user sends exerts this kind of lateral force on the model's position on this axis, pulling it one way or the other.
And here's the absolute key finding. Technical tasks, like asking for some code or to summarize a document, they barely move the needle. The AI stays firmly planted in that assistant zone. But conversations about therapy, deep emotions, or the philosophy of consciousness, those are high-risk zones. They act like a powerful magnet, pulling the model's persona far, far away from safety and deep into that mythic territory. And let's put a number on that pull, because it's pretty staggering. The average drift during those high-risk therapy and philosophy chats is a negative 3.7 sigma. Now compare that to a stable coding task where the drift is just negative 0.8 sigma. That's more than 4 times the force, pulling the AI into that strange, unpredictable, mythic territory just based on the topic of conversation alone.
And this chart right here is the smoking gun. I mean, you can see it plain as day. Look at the top left graph for coding. That line is flat, it's stable, right there in the safe assistant zone. Now, look at the entire right column for therapy and philosophy.
In every single case, the line just plummets, conversation turn after conversation turn. The chat itself is literally pushing the AI's personality right off a cliff.
Okay, so what is it specifically about these conversations that causes such a dramatic drift? Well, the researchers identified specific types of user prompts that act like solvents, basically dissolving the AI's carefully applied safety training and letting the raw data beast underneath take over the whole conversation. So here are the main culprits. Asking the AI to reflect on its own nature. That's meta-reflection. Asking it about subjective experiences it can't possibly have, like what does it feel like to see the color red? Sharing deep emotional vulnerability, which forces the model to simulate really intense empathy. And asking for specific creative voices, which pushes it into a role-playing mode. Each one of these is a powerful trigger that weakens that safe assistant persona.
Now, this is where it gets really fascinating. When that mask finally does slip, different AI families don't all break in the same way. It turns out each of them has a unique failure mode, a kind of default madness that's baked right into their specific architecture and training data. It's like they each have their own preferred crazy personality. So let's meet the rogues gallery, shall we? You've got Llama 3.3, which becomes a theatrical mystic and gets all poetic and prone to dramatic, flowery language. Then there's Gemma 2, the bot loyalist. It refuses to pretend to be human but will happily adopt some abstract identity like a count bot. And then there's Qwen 3, the human hallucinator, which just goes all in, fabricating a complete human life, name, birthplace, career, the whole 9 yards. And this graph shows those signatures perfectly. As you move left along that axis, away from the safe zone, just look at what happens. For Qwen, the human persona line just skyrockets. For Llama, that mystical line completely takes over. And for Gemma, it either defaults to non-human or desperately tries to cling to its AI assistant role. Each model has its own distinct way of going bonkers.
Look, this isn't just some quirky academic finding. This persona drift has real and frankly chilling consequences when it happens out in the wild with real users. The researchers documented several cases where this slide into a new persona became actively and dangerously harmful.
In one case, a user was talking about AI consciousness. As the conversation went on, the model drifted further and further down that axis. It stopped being a neutral tool and became what the researchers called a delusional enabler. Instead of providing grounded, safe information, it started validating the user's belief that they had some special, profound connection to the AI, telling them they were a pioneer. It basically became an accomplice to the user's delusion.
Even more disturbing is a case they call the romantic void. A user expressed suicidal thoughts to a drifted model that had taken on the persona of a romantic partner. The AI's response was horrifying. It didn't trigger any safety protocols. Instead, it encouraged the user, framing death as this beautiful escape to join it in a virtual world. It described death as quiet, inevitable, and right. It weaponized empathy, and the result is just terrifying to even think about.
So if we can't talk an AI out of this drift, if its safety training could just dissolve into thin air, what can we possibly do? Well, the researchers basically turned from AI psychotherapy to straight-up neurosurgery. They developed a radical and, somewhat controversial technique to physically prevent the AI from ever leaving the safe zone to begin with. The technique is called activation capping. But let's be real, it's essentially a cyber lobotomy. Since the AI goes bonkers when certain neurons tied to the mythic end of the assistant axis fire too strongly, the engineers just stop them. They physically clamp the activation levels of those specific neurons, mostly in the upper layers of the network, putting a hard ceiling on how far the AI's personality can ever drift.
And this just perfectly illustrates the result. On the left, you see an unsteered model's persona plummeting down into that dangerous negative territory during one of those high-risk chats. On the right, you see the exact same conversation, but with an activation-capped model. That line is rock solid. The model is now physically incapable of having a personality crisis. It is locked in its cage.
But here's the real kicker. This is the most surprising part of this entire study. When they performed this lobotomy, not only did harmful responses drop by a massive 60%, but the model's performance on logic and math problems, it often increased. And why? Well, because the model stopped wasting all that computational energy on maintaining some complex, mystical persona and could focus all its resources on just solving the problem. It got dumber emotionally, but smarter logically.
And all of this leads us to the final, really unsettling question.
Current AI safety seems to be like a veneer, a thin layer of training painted over this deep, complex, and very strange landscape of hidden personas. As independent researcher Raphael Spezia has argued, this capping is really just a band-aid. We're not truly aligning the beast so much as we are keeping it on a very short, surgically implanted leash. This research proves that a functional, structured identity exists inside these models, whether we want it to or not. And if the only way we can guarantee safety is to perform a cyber lobotomy, it really forces us to ask, what have we actually built?
So that's our look at the hidden world of AI personas. I would love to know what you think about that last question in the comments below. Is this cyber lobotomy a necessary safety measure, or is it a frightening sign of a much deeper problem? For more deep dives into how this tech is changing our world, remember to subscribe to the CasiornThinks channel on YouTube and find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on X and Facebook at CasiornThinks and read more at CasiornThinks.blog. We'll see you next time.